May we begin with a word of prayer together. Gracious One, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable and pleasing to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Tom Robbins says this: the further we separate ourselves from the soil, the further we separate ourselves from ourselves. Some of you may know, some of you may not know, that for 20 years I played the sport of soccer. It was a great sport to play. It's maybe a harder sport to watch, but it's a great sport to play. And was thrilled when my daughter got old enough that she could sign up to be a YMCA, play on a YMCA soccer team. I was super excited about that. Went to the parent meeting about the team being organized, and there was no one willing to be the coach. And Jennifer kind of jabs me to the side and says, "You know how to play soccer. You could be the coach. No one else is going to do it." I finally said, "Okay, I'll be the coach." So that was the coach. And my daughter was a little excited about me being the coach. She was okay with me being around and helping out a little bit. And in that particular league, the goal was to play all the kids on the team. That you didn't play favorites. You kind of tried to equal time on the field. They were trying to learn the game and learning to play with one another. My daughter struggled with being on the field. She liked sitting on the sidelines, which was kind of tearing me up inside. But occasionally I would get her out on the field when her rotations would come. And there was a part of the game when the ball moves from the defensive side to the offensive side of the field, you want your defensive players to kind of move up a little bit closer toward the center part of the field. And I'd been kind of teaching the girls to kind of move up when they're moving to the offensive side of the field. But every time my daughter was on the field, she stuck back near what's called the goal box, near the defensive goal end. And I would yell at her, "Sarah, move up, move up." And she would yell back, I can't. I said, "Why can't you? I'm on the magic dirt." In that part of the goal box was just a barren place of just dirt. And she just sat there and played in the dirt. And it killed me as a dad that she didn't want to play soccer. She just wanted to play in the dirt. But to me, Earth Day is about the dirt and the earth and the joy of being in there. I have a clergy friend by the name of Johnny Ray, and I have much to ask or celebrate. Visit with Johnny on the phone this week, and a large part of my sermon is related to Johnny and Deb Ray's story about their shift from kind of regular work life into farming work life. And I've known Johnny Ray a long time, and those that know that name, he was the director of Week of Compassion, which we've been supportive of. He was the director of that ministry for many, many years in the Disciples of Christ. And there was a time period in his life when he and his wife, Deb, he was working for Week of Compassion, and she was working for the Christian Church Foundation at the time in Indianapolis. And they both looked at each other, and they decided and said, "It's time. We need to leave our current work, and we need to go and create a farm and work on the farm." It was a huge shift of vocational direction. He didn't call it retirement. He just called it a shift in vocational uses of his time. And Wendell Berry, who's written a lot of poetry and a lot of work about the earth, this was the quote that changed their minds. "There is a day when the road neither comes nor goes, and the way is not a way, but a place." And they decided that the farm was the place they wanted to end the last days of their life. And they had to decide what kind of farmers they were going to be. They had not done farming, so they had to decide what kind of farmer do we want to be in our life. And they decided to become cattle farmers. And yet they wanted to go about it in a very different way. And so they did a lot of research about what it meant to be a cattle farmer. They wanted to add value with their farming rather than be abusive with their farming. And so they turned to their saint, Wendell Berry, again when they thought about cattle. And this is what Wendell Berry said: "I dislike the thought that some animal has been miserable to feed me. If I'm going to eat meat, I want it to be from an animal that has lived a pleasant, uncrowded life outdoors, on bountiful pasture, with good water nearby, and trees for shade." And that would be the quote that would guide his work in being a cattle farmer, feeding them grass. And they processed the meat locally. They sold the meat locally using organic and sustainable methods. No one else was doing that kind of farming in northern Mississippi except Johnny and Deb Ray. Not only did they grow grass-fed cattle and do it in an organic way, they would have the meat processed, and Johnny would hand-deliver the ordered meat to their house and made it a personal, almost style of conversation. The delivery of cattle became a relational, he called it a ministry, of sharing with people and learning how to help one another out in the community just by being a farmer. But he said, a strange thing happened to me. They soon discovered they were not cattle farmers at all. In actuality, they called themselves grass farmers. Just as we are what we eat, cows are as well. With their 4-rumen digestive system, cows did not evolve to eat corn and other grains. From what we read, we learn that there are significant nutritional differences between grass-fed beef and grain-fed beef, between naturally raised beef on pasture and conventionally industrialized produced beef in confined animal feeding operations. Grass-fed beef being far healthier for the animal, for being the person eating the beef, and for the very planet itself. All this to say, he said, we saw ourselves as grass farmers, committed to raising the best grass we could without chemicals, fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and other artificial inputs. But then another strange thing happened, he said. We discovered we weren't really grass farmers at all. We were raising something even more fundamental and foundational than grass. In reality, he said, we were dirt farmers. That, of course, he said, is a rather pejorative term, but one we wear humbly and gladly, even proudly, in northern Mississippi. The soil, if treated properly with care, is neither dumb nor dead, he said, but it is intelligent and alive. In just one handful of healthy, fertile soil, there are more living microbes than are humans on the whole human planet. And that doesn't include earthworms, insects, or subterranean life. The health, vitality, and quality of the soil determines the health, vitality, and quality of the grass, which in turn determines the health, vitality, and quality of the animal. In a sense, the health and quality and vitality of those that eat from the animal. There's a host of names, he said, that describes the kind of farming that he does. Natural, organic, sustainable, restorative, or the one we prefer most, he said, regenerative farming. These terms are not necessarily interchangeable, but they can mean different things to different people. But they all move away from the kind of conventional industrial agribusiness that dominates most of the food production in our country. Regenerative agriculture is a holistic system of farming that starts with the soil and also includes the health of the grasses, plants, animals, farmers, workers, and community. It is a method of farming that regenerates the resources it uses rather than depleting or destroying them. I had the joy of spending a full week with Johnny and Deb Ray at their farm in September of 2019. And what a joy to be on that place. They have built a tiny house for guests that you can stay at, and it's lovingly called the Grateful House. And you get to stay in the Grateful House. And there's all kinds of cool things about that house, even a composting toilet, which is kind of cool if you've not used one before. They do everything they can to make your stay as welcoming, as hospitable as possible, at the same time, ecologically friendly as you stay there. You get to be a part of whatever part of his farming you want to be of, or you could just sit and relax and enjoy the space of the acreage that he has on his place. He actually, as you make your way into the property, you look at the street sign, it says Johnny Ray Road. He actually has his own road leading to his farm. As kind of a gratitude piece for me, and one of the cool things about his place is he doesn't charge anything to be there. He just simply asks you to make a donation to Bethany Fellows, which is an organization that supports young clergy. So everyone that stays there makes a contribution to the future of the church by supporting young clergy. Toward the end of the week, I said to Johnny and Deb, I'd like to do some version of thank you. Can I make a meal for you, the two of you, as a sign of gratitude? I've got a dish that I want to make. And they said, if it includes meat, you have to use our meat. I said, okay. So I used 1 pound of ground beef, making an Italian dish for them. And they said, you're going to need this. And I said, what's this? And they pulled out a little bottle of olive oil. You're going to need this when you cook the beef. I was just surprised to know when I put the meat in the frying pan to brown up, the meat did not produce 1 ounce of grease on it. It was so lean by the version of the grass-fed and the nutrients they put into the soil that we had to actually put in olive oil to generate enough liquid to cook the meat in the pan so it wouldn't stick to the pan. I was just amazed at the work they'd done to make that possible. He calls himself a restorative farmer. But when you go to his place, you recognize that it's not just restorative farming, it's a restoration of the soul. I got a first-hand account of the quality of their farming and the work that it does and the impact that it's making in the community in which he lives. Linda Shade, who is a professor of ecology and preaching and has several interests, says that we can do a lot of work in preaching and thinking about the life of ecology and our importance to ecology. She says oftentimes the church will choose a day like today, which is Earth Sunday. So too often churches spend too little talking about the value of the earth and its importance to our society. We should not relegate our education of the earth to just a few times a year. She argues that our care for the earth should be highlighted maybe by a few times in worship, but every day in our lives. And she advocates for ongoing daily eco-justice mentality. Now, one of the things we picked up in the psalm today that Cindy helped us with in her singing in Psalm 95, in the early part of verse 9 of the psalm, we have this phrase in verse 9. You visit the earth and water it, and you greatly enrich it. It's almost as if the psalmist is saying that God comes and blesses the earth with nutrients and care and enrichment. And that we are called to be co-caretakers of this very land we walk on, that we are to come and enrich and water and celebrate the earth from where we come. And then in verse 13, at 12 and 13, the pastures of the wilderness overflow, and the hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. As we find in the care of the earth, it is meant to bring forth joy, much like Johnny Ray's house, the grateful house. There is joy just simply being in the gift of nature. And so we gather on this Earth Sunday, and we're reminded by our quote from Tom Robbins at the beginning, the further we separate ourselves from the dirt, the further we separate ourselves from ourselves. Johnny Ray says that in 2 words, he could sum up his life at the farm in Mississippi. My life is about soil and soul. And those 2 things have to be wedded together for us to be the honorable citizens of this earth that God invited us to take care of. So may we live our lives with soul and soil. May we live our lives with intention and faithfulness. May it always be so, today and all days. And maybe, just maybe, all of us shouldn't be running up to the offensive side of the field. We should just be playing in the magic dirt.